She poured coffee on a grandma at the café, then her phone rang. The coffee had already stained her outfits before anyone saw it. The young woman holding the cup stood there in a yellow outfit that was too bright for the mood she was in. Her hand was shaking from too many drinks and too many thoughts she had since the night before. Her eyes were unfocused, like she'd been awake longer than her body could handle. Her hair looked done, but rushed. Her face showed that she hadn't planned to be anywhere near this cafe that morning. The old woman sat still. Like her body had learned over time that sudden movements weren't worth the risk. The green fabric darkened where the coffee soaked in. Her shoulders dropped slightly in tired acceptance. The young woman realized what she had done before anyone spoke. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked down at the mess, then back at the old woman's face. This was not how the morning was supposed to go. It wasn't even supposed to be a morning. Less than 12 hours earlier, the same young woman had been sitting on the edge of her bed, phone in her hand, rereading a message she already knew by heart. A breakup that didn't end with yelling or cheating. Just distance. A few short sentences that landed harder than insults ever could. Someone deciding they were done without asking if she was ready for that. She hadn't cried right away. She cleaned her kitchen. She folded laundry she didn't need to fold. She tried calling a friend and hung up before it rang. Eventually, she poured a drink. Then another. She told herself she deserved one night where she didn't have to hold it together. By the time the sun came up, sleep hadn't shown up at all. That's how she ended up in a cafe she didn't recognize, wearing yellow like she was trying to convince herself she was fine. She wanted coffee to cancel the alcohol. She wanted noise to drown out her thoughts. She wanted to feel normal for 10 minutes. Instead, she poured coffee on a stranger who looked like she could barely hold her own cup. The old woman's hands rested on the table. One of them trembled slightly. Not fear. Someone rushed over with napkins. Someone else asked if she was okay. The young woman stood there, frozen in a different way than movies show it. She reached for napkins too late, bumping into the person already helping. Her breath came out uneven. Her head nodded too many times, like she was trying to agree with everything at once. The old woman finally looked up at her. That look did more damage than yelling would have. The manager came over. The cafe buzz shifted. People went back to their tables, but they were listening. They always listen. The young woman knew this could go badly. She was aware of how this looked. A younger black woman, clearly not sober, standing over an older white woman who now had coffee on her clothes. She could feel the assumptions lining up in the room, quiet but heavy. She felt ashamed but also tired. Tired of apologizing for existing loudly. Tired of always being the one expected to explain herself perfectly. Still, she didn't fight it. She stayed. The old woman asked for help standing up. Her legs moved slowly, carefully. The coffee hadn't burned her badly, but it startled her body enough to make everything ache at once. She leaned on the table, then on a chair. The young woman hovered, unsure whether stepping closer would help or make things worse. They walked to the restroom area together, close enough to be connected by the moment. Someone offered a sweater. Someone offered to call someone. The young woman paid for the cleaning bill before anyone asked. She didn't check her account balance. She didn't think about rent or groceries. She just did it. The old woman's green outfit was stained beyond saving. She looked at it for a long moment, then sighed. The kind of sigh that comes from someone who has already lost many things and learned how to let go faster. They sat back down, not at the same table, but near enough that leaving without acknowledgement would have felt wrong. The young woman finally spoke, her voice low, uneven, not rehearsed. She said she hadn't meant to hurt her. That she wasn't thinking straight. That she was sorry. The old woman listened. That was it. She didn't demand more. She didn't lecture. She didn't pile guilt on top of guilt. She asked the young woman if she was okay. That question landed sideways. The young woman hadn't expected it. She wasn't prepared to answer honestly. She nodded too quickly, then stopped herself. Her eyes dropped to the floor. She admitted she wasn't. They didn't talk long. The manager offered to comp the meal. The old woman declined. She insisted on paying for her tea. Small pride. Big life. Before leaving, the old woman wrote something down. An address. A business name. A phone number written carefully, like handwriting mattered. She told the young woman she worked in real estate. Not actively anymore. Mostly advising. Connecting people. Helping younger professionals avoid mistakes she had already made. The young woman didn't understand why she was being given this kindness. She didn't ask. They parted awkwardly. No hug. No dramatic closure. Just two people walking away from a moment that could have ended very differently. The young woman sat in her car for a long time after. Her head rested against the steering wheel. Not crying. Just breathing. She thought about the coffee. The outfit. The look on the old woman's face. The way the room had gone quiet. The way no one had yelled. She told herself she got lucky. She didn't know how true that was yet. 2 days later, the old woman called. The young woman stared at the phone when it rang. She didn't recognize the number at first. When she answered and heard the voice, her stomach tightened. The call wasn't about the coffee. It was about her. The old woman said she had been thinking about her since the café. Said she recognized that look. The one people get when something has recently ended and the ground still feels unstable. She asked if the young woman wanted to talk. Not about business. About life. The young woman said yes before she had time to overthink it. They met again, this time in an office that smelled like paper and lemon cleaner. The old woman wore a different green outfit. Still soft. Still careful. The young woman wore neutral colors this time. Like she didn't trust herself with brightness yet. They talked without rushing. About work. About stress. About how breakups don't always look dramatic but can still leave a mess. The young woman shared pieces, not everything. She didn't mention names. She didn't mention how blindsided she felt. She just explained that she thought she had been building something solid, and then one day it was gone. The old woman listened again. Then she said something that shifted the air in the room. She said the young woman reminded her of someone. The young woman smiled politely, expecting a comparison to a niece or a past colleague. Instead, the old woman paused. She said it reminded her of her son. The room didn't stop. The clock kept ticking. The young woman's breathing stayed steady. But something inside her shifted. She didn't know it yet, but the man who had ended her relationship was the old woman's son. She wouldn't know for a while. And when she did, it would change how she saw that coffee spill forever. For now, all she knew was that a stranger she had wronged had chosen to open a door instead of closing it. And that choice was about to pull her into a story she never expected to be part of. The second meeting wasn't planned to mean anything big. It was supposed to be practical. A short talk. Maybe a few tips about business. That was it. But nothing about it stayed small. The old woman's office wasn't fancy. No shiny walls or glass tables. It felt lived in. Papers stacked neatly but clearly used. Framed photos that weren't for show. One of them sat slightly crooked, like it had been bumped and never fixed. The young woman noticed those details right away. She always did. She paid attention to spaces the way some people paid attention to faces. They sat across from each other, not close, not distant. Comfortable enough to talk. The old woman folded her hands slowly, like her joints needed time to agree with her intentions. She asked how the young woman had been sleeping. The answer came out honest before the young woman could soften it. She said not well. She said nights felt longer than they used to. She said mornings came too fast. The old woman nodded. No shock. No pity. She said heartbreak doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it just messes with your routine until nothing fits the way it used to. That line stuck. They didn't go deep right away. The young woman talked about her real estate work instead. How she had been trying to grow her business, how investors kept saying they'd circle back and never did. How she knew she was good at what she did, but confidence had been harder to hold onto lately. The old woman leaned back slightly and listened. She asked specific questions. Not vague encouragement. She wanted to know how long the young woman had been in the field, what markets she worked in, where deals tended to stall. It didn't feel like charity. It felt like being taken seriously. At the end of that meeting, the old woman pulled out a small notebook and wrote down 2 names. Investors she trusted. People who didn't waste time if they said yes. She told the young woman she would make an introduction, but only if she promised to show up prepared. No emotional fog. No half-effort. The young woman agreed quickly. She meant it. Before leaving, the old woman asked something unexpected. She asked if the young woman had ever talked to a professional about the breakup. Not friends. Not co-workers. Someone neutral. The young woman hesitated. She admitted she hadn't. She said therapy felt like something other people did. People with bigger problems. The old woman smiled slightly. Not amused. Just knowing. She said pain doesn't need permission to count. She offered to help with that too. She knew a therapist who worked with women rebuilding after emotional setbacks. No pressure. No obligation. Just an option. The young woman left that office with more than she walked in with. Context. Direction. And something harder to name. A feeling that someone had seen through the mess without judging it. Over the next few weeks, their connection grew in quiet ways. Emails first. Then short calls. Updates about investor meetings. Notes about progress. The old woman gave feedback that was honest but fair. She didn't hype things up. She pointed out weaknesses without making them feel like failures. The therapy sessions started slowly. The young woman didn't open up much at first. She talked around things. Work stress. Sleep patterns. General sadness. But eventually, the breakup found its way into the room. She talked about how it ended. How normal the day had been. How there was no warning sign that made sense afterward. How she kept replaying conversations, looking for clues she must have missed. She didn't talk about the man like a villain. That surprised the therapist. She talked about him like someone who had simply stepped out of her life without realizing how loud that exit would feel on the inside. Between therapy and work, the days started filling up again. Not happily. Just steadily. And sometimes that was enough. The old woman began inviting her to lunch. Nothing fancy. Simple places. Soup. Sandwiches. Quiet tables where conversation didn't need to compete with noise. They talked about everything except the café incident. That moment stayed unspoken, like both of them understood it didn't need to be picked apart to matter. The old woman shared stories from her past. Not dramatic ones. Practical lessons. Mistakes she had made by trusting the wrong people. Times she had walked away too late or too early. She talked about business and life in the same breath, like they were never separate for her. The young woman noticed something over time. Whenever the old woman mentioned her son, it was brief. Careful. No details. Just passing references. He lived out of state. He was busy. He worked in tech. That was it. The young woman didn't press. Everyone had their reasons. One afternoon, after a particularly productive investor call, the old woman surprised her with genuine praise. She said the young woman had a sharp mind. That she could read people well. That her instincts were solid, even if her confidence had taken a hit recently. The young woman laughed lightly and said she wished her ex had seen that. The moment passed quietly, but something shifted in the old woman's expression. Not guilt. Not fear. Something closer to reflection. She asked one question. Just one. She asked what had caused the breakup. The young woman shrugged. She said she still didn't fully understand. She said he told her he wasn't ready for what they were building. That he felt pressure he didn't know how to handle. That he needed space to figure himself out. She said it hurt more because she had believed him when he said he was all in. The old woman didn't comment right away. She stared at her tea for a moment, then said something simple. She said some people leave when things start getting real, not because the relationship is wrong, but because they don't feel ready to be seen fully. The young woman nodded. She had heard versions of that before, but hearing it from someone who sounded like she'd lived it made it land differently. Weeks passed. The business introductions paid off. One investor said yes. Another asked for more details. Momentum built. Slowly but real. Therapy helped too. Not in a dramatic, movie-style way. Just in small shifts. Fewer late nights staring at the ceiling. Less self-blame. More clarity. The old woman watched all of it from the side, offering guidance without control. She never took credit. She never acted like a savior. Then came the day that connected all the threads. They were having lunch when the old woman casually mentioned her son again. She said he had recently gone through a breakup too. That he seemed distant lately. that she worried he didn't always understand the impact of his choices. The young woman paused mid-bite. Something about the timing felt strange. The phrasing, the tone. She asked where her son lived. The old woman answered. The city matched. The young woman asked what he did. Tech same role. Same type of company. Her chest tightened slightly, but she kept her voice steady. She asked his name. The old woman said it. The room didn't collapse. The table didn't shake. But everything lined up. The young woman didn't react right away. She didn't interrupt. She didn't accuse. She just sat there, letting the realization settle in quietly. This woman, the one she had spilled coffee on, the one who had helped her rebuild piece by piece. She was the mother of the man who had broken her heart. The old woman noticed the shift in her posture. The way her shoulders squared. The way her eyes focused too sharply. She asked what was wrong. The young woman took a breath and told the truth. Calmly, clearly. No raised voice. No blame. She said her ex was her son. Silence followed. Not awkward. Heavy. The old woman leaned back, processing. She didn't deny it. She didn't defend him. She didn't ask for details right away. She simply said she was sorry. The young woman expected anger to rise. Or resentment. Or regret about the coffee incident. Instead, she felt something else. Relief. Because for the first time, the story made sense. And now, the past and present were about to collide in ways neither of them had planned. After the name was spoken, nothing rushed to fill the space. No dramatic reactions. No raised voices. Just two people sitting across from each other, letting the truth settle where it needed to land. The cafe noise around them kept going like nothing had happened. Plates clinked. Someone laughed at another table. Life stayed normal, even though something important had just shifted. The young woman expected the old woman to pull back. To grow cold. To defend her son. That's how these moments usually go. Blood over strangers. Family over fairness. But that didn't happen. The old woman looked at her with the same calm expression she had shown since the first day. The only difference was a trace of heaviness around her eyes. Not surprise. Recognition. She said she had suspected it might be him. That caught the young woman off guard. The old woman explained that some of the details lined up early on. The timing. The city. The emotional state the young woman described. She said she hadn't wanted to ask because it felt invasive. She said she believed people should reveal what they're ready to share in their own time. The young woman nodded. She appreciated that more than she expected. The old woman didn't make excuses for her son. She didn't explain his behavior away. She said he had always struggled with commitment when things became serious. She said he was thoughtful but avoidant. Kind but distant when pressure showed up. She admitted that loving someone didn't mean pretending their flaws didn't hurt others. That sentence stayed with the young woman. They talked openly then. Not about details of the relationship, but about impact. About how endings affect people differently. About how some walk away lighter while others carry the weight for months. The young woman admitted something she hadn't said out loud before. She said part of her didn't regret the coffee incident. Not because it was right. Not because it felt good. But because it brought her into this connection that helped her heal in ways she hadn't expected. The old woman didn't take offense. She smiled faintly and said life sometimes rearranges itself through mistakes. That day ended without tension. No distance. No awkward goodbye. If anything, their bond felt more honest. In the weeks that followed, the old woman became more present in the young woman's life. Not hovering. Just steady. She checked in after therapy sessions. She asked about deals and deadlines. She remembered small things. Preferred lunches. Meeting times. Names of people the young woman mentioned once. The young woman noticed how rare that kind of attention was. Not intrusive. Just consistent. One afternoon, during a visit to the old woman's office, the young woman met someone new. A man who worked in the same building. Mid-30s. Calm energy. Professional without being stiff. He stopped by to drop off documents for the old woman and stayed longer than necessary. They exchanged polite conversation. Nothing flirtatious. Just easy. After he left, the old woman raised an eyebrow slightly and asked what she thought of him. The young woman laughed and said she hadn't thought anything yet. The old woman didn't push. Over time, those small interactions added up. Passing conversations in the hallway. Shared lunches when schedules lined up. The man asked thoughtful questions. He listened more than he spoke. He didn't rush anything. The young woman noticed how different it felt from her past relationship. No guessing games. No emotional whiplash. Just steady interest. She told her therapist about it. Not as a romance. Just as an observation. The therapist asked how it made her feel. She said safe. That surprised her. Meanwhile, the old woman continued helping her professionally. One investor connection led to another. The young woman's confidence returned gradually. Not loudly. Just firmly. She started dressing differently. Not to impress. Just to reflect how she felt. Put together. Grounded. One day, over lunch, the old woman asked a direct question. She asked if the young woman had forgiven her son. The young woman thought about it carefully before answering. She said she didn't hold anger anymore. She said she understood that he wasn't capable of what she needed at the time. She said that knowledge brought peace, even if it didn't excuse the hurt. The old woman nodded. She said that was more grace than many people managed. She never asked the young woman to speak to him. She never suggested reconciliation. She respected the boundary without needing it spelled out. That mattered. As months passed, the connection between the young woman and the man from the office grew naturally. They started having lunch intentionally. Then dinner. Then weekends that didn't feel heavy or complicated. The old woman watched from a distance, careful not to interfere. When the young woman finally told her they were seeing each other, the old woman smiled with genuine happiness. She said she was glad. Not because she arranged it, but because the young woman seemed lighter. The engagement didn't happen quickly. It came after conversations about goals, about timelines, about emotional readiness. When it did happen, it felt earned. The old woman was there, quietly proud, not center stage. She wore green again that day. The young woman wore yellow. And the coffee incident became something they laughed about softly, not because it was funny, but because of how much life had unfolded since. They never spoke about the son again. There was no need. The story wasn't about him anymore. It was about two women who met through a mistake and chose growth instead of bitterness. By the time the engagement happened, life had settled into a rhythm the young woman hadn't thought possible a few months earlier. The coffee spill felt like a lifetime ago. A ridiculous accident that somehow rewrote her path. The old woman continued to be present, but not overbearing. She came to lunches sometimes just to check in, sometimes bringing small, practical advice. An introduction here, a tip there. She wore green as always, not flashy, not imposing, just steady. Watching her reminded the young woman how small gestures could shape a life. The young woman's business started to take off. Deals that had stalled now moved forward. Investors trusted her because she had grown more decisive, more grounded. It wasn't overnight, but it felt earned, and the satisfaction was real. She started mentoring younger colleagues herself, using lessons learned from both the old woman and her own mistakes. Her personal life began to flourish too. Lunches with the man from her office became a fixture. They didn't rush. No dramatic gestures. Just meals that stretched into walks, then into weekend plans. There was laughter. Arguments, small and normal, about trivial things like restaurants or movies. Real-life stuff, nothing staged. The old woman watched silently at first. Then, one afternoon, she asked if the young woman had considered moving forward with something more serious. The young woman thought about it. She realized she had been afraid of intimacy for so long that she hadn't noticed how natural it felt to be with him. She admitted that, slowly, finally letting herself feel something genuine without expecting it to break. Eventually, the engagement came quietly. No elaborate setup. No dramatic proposal. A conversation over lunch, sitting across from each other, hands brushing, eyes locking. It felt like the only step forward that made sense. The old woman was there, sitting slightly apart, letting them have the moment. She smiled without comment. The young woman caught her gaze and saw pride, not interference. In the months that followed, the young woman reflected often on the coffee incident. She realized it had been a turning point, but not because of shame or regret. It was because of the humanity that followed. The old woman could have walked away. She could have let anger dominate. But she hadn't. That choice had pulled the young woman into a space where healing was possible. Even the thought of her ex, the son, was no longer painful. It wasn't that the memory disappeared. It was just distant. The emotional weight had been removed by perspective, therapy, and the unexpected support from someone she'd wronged. The office romance grew naturally into a life together. They moved forward with trust, patience, and laughter. The old woman occasionally joined for lunches, often bringing quiet wisdom or connections that helped both their personal and professional growth. She didn't dominate their lives, but her presence was steady, reassuring. The young woman realized that life rarely worked the way she expected. Sometimes mistakes weren't disasters. Sometimes chaos became opportunity. Sometimes a spilled cup of coffee could turn into mentorship, friendship, and even love. And in quiet moments, when she looked back at the day in the café, she didn't feel embarrassment or shame. She felt gratitude. For a stranger who saw her humanity before her mistakes. For a mother who chose kindness over judgment. For the chance to rebuild herself in ways she never thought possible. By the time she moved into her new life, stronger, grounded, in love, and thriving professionally, she knew that some accidents weren't accidents at all. They were invitations. To connection. To growth. To unexpected turns that make the story worth telling. The old woman remained a constant, but subtle presence, a reminder that forgiveness and understanding could be more powerful than anger or blame. And the young woman carried that lesson forward every day in her business, in her personal life, and in the small kindnesses she offered to others. Life didn't feel fragile anymore. It felt full. The engagement wasn't flashy. No staged photos, no viral announcement. Just a quiet Sunday brunch. The young woman wore a simple yellow dress, bright but comfortable. The man from her office wore a suit that fit well but wasn't showy. Their hands found each other naturally across the table. The old woman came too. Green, subdued, steady. She sat back slightly, letting the couple have the moment while being present enough to share in their happiness. She had been there from the beginning, quietly guiding, mentoring, supporting. No one mentioned the past, the cafe, the coffee spill, or the ex who had caused so much heartbreak. There was no need. The story had moved forward. Life had shifted in ways no one could have predicted. After brunch, they went for a short walk, just 3 of them, past quiet streets and autumn trees. People passed, not knowing anything about the story unfolding beside them. The old woman smiled at small things, the young woman laughing, the man reaching to brush a leaf from her shoulder. Observing but not intruding. Back at the office the next week, the young woman realized how much had changed. Meetings flowed more smoothly. She spoke with confidence she hadn't had before. Investors responded quickly. The career growth wasn't because of luck. It was because she had been guided, helped, and had taken the chance to grow herself. Therapy had done more than help her process a breakup. It had taught her to set boundaries, to see patterns, and to understand that some endings weren't personal failures, they were lessons. The old woman remained in her life, but no longer as a mentor who helped navigate mistakes. She was now a friend, a confidant. Someone who had seen her at her worst and chosen to stay. One afternoon, sitting in a quiet lunch spot they often visited, the young woman realized something remarkable. The coffee incident, which had seemed like a disaster, had been the doorway. Without it, she might never have met the old woman, never gained the business insight, never found therapy support, never met the man she would marry. The story that began with embarrassment and chaos had ended with growth, love, and stability. She laughed quietly, thinking about how fragile life can feel in a moment and how strong it becomes over time. The old woman caught her eye and nodded. No words were needed. They had both seen the transformation. From a coffee spill to an engagement. From heartbreak to healing. From loneliness to connection. Weeks later, the young woman moved into her new apartment, a space she decorated carefully, not extravagantly, but thoughtfully. She invited the old woman over, and they shared a quiet meal, talking about business updates, life lessons, and small joys. The young woman noticed how the old woman's frail appearance belied her strength. The woman had guided her through storms without ever forcing her hand. The engagement day, the wedding day, and even the smallest celebrations after, all carried the weight of gratitude. Gratitude for mistakes, for kindness, for growth, for love. And somewhere in the background of all this, the ex, the son, never appeared again. He was a ghost of the past that had inadvertently shaped her future. By the time the young woman walked down the aisle, yellow dress flowing softly, the old woman standing nearby in green, it wasn't about coffee anymore. It was about everything that followed. Every hard day, every uncomfortable moment, every small gesture of trust and patience. Life had taken the coffee spill, a broken heart, and a series of coincidences, and turned them into a life she hadn't dared imagine. She didn't just survive the mistake. She thrived because of it. Real life, messy and imperfect, leading to love, healing, and unexpected happiness.